Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun blazed mercilessly over the parched landscape, where the line between civilization and savagery was as thin as the horizon. Yates Daniels wiped the sweat from his brow, his young face hardened beyond his 25 years. The frontier had taught him one immutable truth: a man survived alone or not at all. Attachments were dangerous. Love was a luxury that got people killed in this unforgiving wilderness. He adjusted his worn Stetson and surveyed the cattle herd stretching across the dusty plain. 3 years working as trail boss for the Double Creek Ranch had earned him respect but kept him isolated. Just as he preferred it, just as it had to be. Riders coming in from the east, boss, called Micah, the youngest hand, barely 18 and still believing in dreams. Yates squinted against the glare. 3 figures on horseback approached through the heat waves shimmering off the distant rocks. Not the usual path for travelers, not the usual time. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip. "Keep the herd moving," he ordered, spurring his chestnut stallion forward. "I'll see what they want." As the distance closed between them, Yates saw they were Apache scouts working for the cavalry, 2 men and a woman. He'd heard the army had started using tribal trackers, but he'd never seen a woman among them. The men wore parts of military uniforms mixed with traditional clothing, but it was the woman who caught his attention. She sat tall in the saddle, straight-backed and proud. Her raven-black hair was pulled back in a single long braid that reached the middle of her back, with a red band woven through it. Unlike many native women he'd seen near the settlements wearing government-issued dresses, she wore a traditional buckskin outfit adorned with intricate beadwork. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, yet her dark eyes held wisdom beyond her years. "We seek passage through your herd," the older of the 2 men said in careful English. "We track raiders who stole army horses." Yates nodded curtly. "Stay clear of my beeves and you'll have no trouble from us." The woman spoke then, her voice strong and melodic. "The raiders passed this way before dawn, 6 men heading toward Dragon Mountains." Something in her direct gaze unsettled him. She looked at him as though she could see past his carefully constructed walls, past the hardened cowboy exterior to the lonely boy who'd once believed in more than just survival. "Name's Yates Daniels," he said, surprising himself with the introduction. "Trail boss for Double Creek." "I am Kiona Eagle Feather," she replied. "These are my cousins, Joseph and Thomas." "You're working for the army." Yates couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. A flash of something defiance perhaps crossed her face. "I track for the army because it serves my people. The raiders attack both white settlements and Apache camps. We all bleed the same color, Mr. Daniels." Her words struck him like a physical blow. We all bleed the same color. Such a simple truth, yet one the frontier seemed determined to disprove daily with its endless cycle of violence between settlers and natives. "You'll find better tracking on the North Ridge," Yates found himself saying. "Game trail runs parallel to the creek bed. Hoof prints show clearer there." Kiona's expression softened slightly. "Thank you." As they rode away, Micah sidled up beside him. "Pretty for an Indian, ain't she?" "Mind the cattle," Yates snapped, turning his horse back toward the herd, trying to ignore the strange feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his world. 3 days later, with the herd bedded down for the night near Silver Creek, Yates found himself staring into the campfire, the encounter with the Apache woman still troubling his thoughts. The trail drive to Tucson was nearly halfway complete, and he should be focused on getting the cattle to market, not dwelling on a chance meeting with a woman he'd likely never see again. "Riders coming in," the call from the night watchman jolted Yates to his feet, hand on his pistol. Through the darkness came 2 horses at a gallop. Even before they reached the firelight, Yates recognized the smaller silhouette Kiona. Something was wrong. The other rider was slumped forward, barely staying in the saddle. "Help us," she called as they thundered into camp. "Joseph's been shot." Yates and 2 of his men rushed forward, catching Joseph as he slipped from his horse. Blood soaked the man's shirt from a wound in his side. "Raiders ambushed us," Kiona explained, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Thomas is dead. They were waiting for us." Yates barked orders to the cook to boil water and prepare bandages. They carried Joseph to a bedroll near the fire. "What happened to the army patrol?" Yates asked as they cut away the bloody shirt. Kiona's face hardened. "They turned back yesterday. Said they had orders to protect the fort, not chase ghosts in the mountains." The bullet had gone clean through Joseph's side, a lucky wound if they could stop the bleeding and prevent infection. Yates had seen enough men die from less. While they worked to clean and bandage the injury, Kiona explained how they'd tracked the raiders to a canyon hideout only to be spotted and ambushed. Thomas had been killed instantly. She and Joseph had barely escaped. "Why keep following them after the army turned back?" Yates asked, passing her a cup of coffee as Joseph finally fell into a restless sleep. Kiona's dark eyes reflected the firelight. "The leader of the raiders is a man called Santiago. 2 years ago, he led an attack on my village while the men were away hunting. 17 women and children died, including my sister and her baby." Yates felt something crack in the armor around his heart. He understood vengeance. It had driven him for years after Comanches had killed his parents when he was 14. That rage had shaped him, hardened him, taught him that attachment only led to unbearable loss. "You can't go after them alone," he said. "I do not need your permission, Mr. Daniels." The firelight caught the proud line of her cheekbone, the determination in her jaw. "I'm not giving permission, I'm offering help." The words surprised him as much as they clearly surprised her. Kiona studied him, her expression guarded. "Why would you risk yourself for Apache troubles?" "Like you said," Yates replied quietly, "we all bleed the same color." Dawn broke with Joseph running a fever, clearly too weak to travel. Yates had made arrangements with the cook and 2 of his most trusted hands to care for the wounded man and continue moving the herd slowly toward Tucson. He'd catch up with them before they reached market. "You're risking your job," Kiona said as they rode side by side away from the camp, following the trail toward the Dragon Mountains. "Wouldn't be the first time," Yates replied, though in truth, he'd never abandoned a cattle drive before. Something about this woman and her quest had awakened something he'd long thought dead within him, a desire to fight for something beyond mere survival. They rode in companionable silence for several miles, the rhythm of their horses' hooves a steady counterpoint to Yates' tumultuous thoughts. He found himself studying her profile. The straight nose, the determined set of her mouth, the way she held herself with dignity despite the grief and rage he sensed simmering beneath her calm exterior. "You lost someone too," she said suddenly, not a question but a statement of fact. Yates stiffened. "What makes you say that?" "Your eyes," Kiona replied simply. "They hold the same shadows as mine." For a moment he considered deflecting with his usual gruff dismissal. Instead, he found himself speaking of things he'd shared with no one in years. "Comanches raided our homestead when I was 14. I was out hunting. Came back to find the cabin burning and my parents." He trailed off, the memory still raw after 11 years. "And you have been alone since then," she observed. "Safer that way," he said. "Can't lose what you don't have." Kiona's gaze was piercing. Is a life without connection truly living, Yates Daniels, or merely surviving? Before he could answer, she stiffened, raising her hand for silence. In one fluid motion, she dismounted and crouched to study the ground. "Fresh tracks," she murmured, "no more than 2 hours old, 7 horses." "I thought you said 6 raiders." "There were 6, her eyes met his, concern evident. "They've added someone to their group." They followed the tracks to a narrow canyon, where Kiona signaled for them to dismount and proceed on foot. They tied their horses in a grove of cottonwoods and crept forward, keeping to the shadows of the rock walls. The sound of men's voices carried on the still air, along with the acrid smell of wood smoke. From behind a boulder they observed the camp, 6 rough-looking men and 1 terrified young woman, bound and sitting apart from the group. She couldn't have been more than 16, her blonde hair tangled, her face tear-stained. "They must have raided one of the homesteads," Yates whispered, anger rising in his throat. Kiona pointed to a tall man with a pockmarked face and a red bandana. "Santiago," she said, her voice tight with controlled rage. Yates assessed the situation quickly. 7 against 2 are poor odds, even with surprise on our side. "What do you suggest? We cannot leave her with them." "No," Yates agreed, "but we need a distraction." He outlined a simple but dangerous plan. Kiona would create a diversion at the far end of the canyon while he moved in to free the girl. Then they would retreat, firing from cover. As night fell, they put their plan into action. Kiona slipped away while Yates worked his way closer to the camp. When a series of small explosions erupted from the far side of the canyon, Kiona setting off the spare ammunition they'd packed in tin cans, the raiders leapt to their feet, grabbing weapons and shouting in confusion. Yates seized his moment, darting into the camp and cutting the girl's bonds. "Run for the boulders," he whispered urgently. "Stay low." But before they could escape, Santiago turned and spotted them. "We've been tricked," he shouted, raising his rifle. Yates pushed the girl ahead of him and drew his Colt, firing twice in rapid succession. One raider fell. Santiago and the others dove for cover, returning fire as Yates scrambled behind rocks. The girl had made it to safety, but now Yates was pinned down with raiders on three sides. Bullets chipped stone inches from his head. He was running out of ammunition and options when a war cry echoed through the canyon. Kiona charged from the shadows, firing with deadly accuracy. Two more raiders fell before the others realized they were caught in a crossfire. In the confusion, Yates broke from cover, shooting as he ran toward better position. A bullet grazed his arm, another tore through his hat. He dove behind a fallen tree trunk, coming face to face with the terrified girl. "Stay down," he ordered, reloading quickly. The gunfight seemed to last forever, though it was probably only minutes. When the shooting finally stopped, 4 raiders lay dead. 2 had escaped on horseback, including Santiago. "Are you hurt?" Kiona asked, appearing suddenly beside them, concern evident in her eyes as she noticed the blood on Yates' sleeve. "Just a scratch," he assured her, then turned to the girl. "What's your name, miss?" "Emma Clarkson," she replied, her voice trembling. "They attacked our farm yesterday, my parents." "I'm sorry," Yates said gently, knowing all too well what she had likely witnessed. They made camp away from the raiders' site, building a small fire after determining the survivors had fled westward. Emma eventually fell into exhausted sleep while Yates kept watch, Kiona tending to his wounded arm. "Your plan was good," she said as she wrapped a bandage around his bicep, "but reckless." "Seems to have worked out all right," he replied with a half-smile. This time, her fingers lingered on his arm. "You risked much for strangers today." Yates looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside him. Not strangers, not anymore. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Kiona withdrew her hand. "Santiago escaped. My vengeance remains unfulfilled." "There's the girl to consider now," Yates said. "She needs to reach safety before we can continue tracking." Kiona raised an eyebrow. "I started this with you, I'll see it finished." What he didn't say was that the thought of parting from her now seemed impossible, as though in the span of just days she had become essential to him in ways he couldn't articulate. They reached the town of Douglas 2 days later, where Emma had relatives willing to take her in. The local sheriff took their report about the raiders but seemed skeptical of their account. "You expect me to believe an Apache woman and a cowboy took on 7 armed raiders?" he asked, eyeing Kiona with undisguised distrust. "Believe what you want," Yates replied coldly. "But Santiago and one other are still out there, and they've killed at least 20 people that we know of." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Even if I believed you, which I don't entirely, I can't spare men to go chasing outlaws in Apache territory. Army might help, though they don't take kindly to civilians conducting their own justice." As they left the sheriff's office, Yates noticed how the townspeople stared at Kiona, some with curiosity, others with open hostility. She held her head high, seemingly unaffected, but he saw the tension in her shoulders. "Town's not safe for you," he said quietly as they walked to the livery stable. "Few places are," she replied. "This is why my people keep to themselves. In your towns, I am always the enemy." "Not to me," Yates said, surprising himself with the ferocity in his voice. They rode out that afternoon, heading toward the mountains where they believed Santiago had a second hideout. As they made camp that evening, Kiona shared stories of her childhood, of Apache traditions and beliefs. Yates found himself captivated not just by the tales but by the woman herself, her strength, her intelligence, her unexpected moments of humor. "My grandmother would say our meeting was written in the stars," she told him as they sat by the fire. She believed that spirits sometimes guide 2 souls together for a purpose. "And what purpose would that be?" Yates asked, his voice rough with emotions he dared not name. Kiona's dark eyes reflected the firelight, perhaps to heal each other's wounds, to remember that even in this harsh land, no one survives alone forever. Something changed between them that night. Nothing was spoken, nothing acted upon, but as they rolled into their separate bedrolls, Yates knew his carefully constructed walls were crumbling. The belief that had guided him for 11 years, that attachment only led to pain, was being challenged by this remarkable woman who had somehow seen through his defenses to the lonely soul beneath. They tracked Santiago for 5 more days, moving deeper into the rugged mountains. The trail led them to an abandoned mining camp tucked into a remote valley. From their vantage point on a ridge, they counted 4 men moving about the dilapidated buildings. Santiago and his remaining man must have met up with others, Yates observed. "We cannot take them as we did before," Kiona said. They will be expecting tricks. They watched through the day, formulating and discarding plans. As dusk approached, a wagon arrived at the camp, driven by a well-dressed man who didn't fit with the rough outlaws. "That's Jonathan Price," Yates said in disbelief, recognizing the banker from Tucson. "What's he doing with raiders?" The answer became clear as they observed the meeting. Price was examining items the raiders had stolen, paying them from a strongbox in his wagon. "He funds them," Kiona realized. "They raid, he profits." "And no one suspects the respectable banker," Yates added grimly. "That explains how they've operated so long without getting caught." Their discovery changed everything. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore, it was about exposing a criminal enterprise that had caused suffering for both settlers and Apache alike. "We need to get back to Tucson," Yates decided, "with proof. This is bigger than just Santiago now." As they turned to descend from their lookout, a voice behind them froze them in place. Well, what have we here?" Santiago stood 10 feet away, rifle aimed at them. "The Apache witch and her white dog. You've caused me considerable trouble." Two more men appeared from the brush, weapons drawn. Yates cursed himself for being so focused on the camp that he'd failed to watch their backs. "Drop your guns," Santiago ordered, slowly. They had no choice but to comply. The raiders bound their wrists and marched them down to the camp, where Price was preparing to leave. "Who are these two?" the banker demanded, clearly agitated at finding unexpected prisoners. "The ones who have been hunting me," Santiago replied. "Killed 4 of my men in Dragon Canyon." Price studied them coldly. "They know about our arrangements. They've been watching long enough." The banker's expression hardened. "Then they can't leave here alive. Kill them and bury them deep." "The Apache woman first," Santiago said, drawing a knife. "I want to take my time with her, make her pay for my men." As he approached Kiona, Yates lunged forward despite his bonds, only to be struck down by one of the other men. Blood filled his mouth from the blow. "You'll watch her die," Santiago taunted him, "then it's your turn." Kiona stood tall, defiant even in the face of death. Her eyes met Yates, and in that moment he knew with soul-deep certainty that he loved her. The realization crashed through him like a thunderbolt. He had spent years believing love was a weakness, a liability in this harsh land, only to discover that it might be the greatest strength of all. And now he would lose it before he ever had the chance to embrace it. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A shot rang out and one of Santiago's men crumpled, then another shot and another. Chaos erupted as bullets rained down on the camp from the surrounding ridges. "Apache!" someone shouted. Through his dazed vision, Yates saw Joseph leading a group of warriors in a coordinated attack. They had tracked him and Kiona after Joseph recovered enough to travel. In the confusion, Yates rolled to a discarded knife and cut his bonds, then freed Kiona. They scrambled for cover as gunfire echoed through the valley. Price made a dash for his wagon but never reached it. Kiona's throwing knife caught him in the back, sending him sprawling into the dust. Santiago, seeing his operation collapsing around him, fled toward the horses. "No," Kiona cried, grabbing a fallen pistol and racing after him. Yates followed, his heart pounding with fear for her. He rounded a building just in time to see Santiago turn and fire. Kiona dropped, clutching her shoulder. Something primal awakened in Yates. He charged forward with a roar of rage, tackling Santiago before he could fire again. They rolled in the dirt, grappling for the gun. Santiago was heavier, stronger, but Yates fought with the desperate fury of a man with everything to lose. The gun went off between them. For a terrible moment, Yates thought he'd been shot. Then Santiago's grip loosened and the man fell back, a red stain spreading across his chest. "Kiona," Yates scrambled to her side, terror gripping him at the sight of her blood-soaked tunic. "I am alive," she assured him, grimacing in pain. The bullet passed through. He helped her sit up against a wall, tearing strips from his shirt to bind the wound. All around them, the battle was ending as the remaining raiders surrendered or fell. "You came back for me," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face with her good hand. "I'll always come back for you," Yates replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, Kiona. I think maybe I've loved you since that first day you rode into my camp." She smiled despite her pain. "My grandmother was right." Our souls recognized each other. Joseph found them moments later, concern for his cousin evident on his face. "She needs a doctor," Yates told him. "We will take her to our medicine woman," Joseph replied. "She has healed worse wounds." "I'm coming with you," Yates said, in a tone that brooked no argument. Joseph studied him for a long moment, then nodded. So be it. 3 weeks later, Yates stood before the tribal council of Kiona's people, his heart pounding harder than it had during any gunfight. He had spent those weeks in their camp, an outsider permitted to stay only because of what he had done to help expose Price's operation and end Santiago's raids. The army had arrested the remaining outlaws and the banker, bringing a measure of justice to both sides. Kiona's wound had healed well under the care of the medicine woman. During those weeks, their bond had deepened, but the future remained uncertain. An Apache woman and a white cowboy, the world seemed arrayed against such a union. Now, having requested this audience with the council, Yates removed his hat and spoke with all the sincerity in his soul. "I come to ask permission to marry Kiona Eagle Feather," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I know I am not of your people, I know such a union would be unusual. But I love her, and I believe our paths were meant to cross." The elders exchanged glances. The oldest, a man whose face was mapped with the wisdom of many winters, leaned forward. "You understand that to marry one of the people means to become one with the people, to learn our ways, our language, our beliefs." "I do," Yates answered without hesitation. "I have lived believing that the path of a man must be walked alone. Kiona has taught me otherwise. With her I have found not just love but a home for my spirit." The council deliberated for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, the old man nodded. "If Kiona Eagle Feather accepts you, then we will not stand in the way of what the Creator has joined." Kiona stepped forward from where she had been waiting at the edge of the circle. Her face was solemn, but her eyes danced with joy as she took Yates' hand. "I accept this man as my husband," she declared, "not as a cowboy or a white man, but as Yates Daniels, whose heart speaks to mine." The wedding took place as summer gave way to autumn. It was unlike anything Yates had imagined for himself, blending Apache traditions with elements of the Christian ceremony he remembered from his childhood. Joseph stood as his witness, and the same medicine woman who had healed Kiona's wound blessed their union. Yates had resigned from Double Creek Ranch, using his savings to purchase land in a fertile valley that bordered Apache territory, a symbolic bridge between two worlds. Together, he and Kiona began building a life that honored both their heritages. It wasn't always easy. They faced prejudice from both sides, suspicion, and sometimes outright hostility. But for every person who rejected their union, there seemed to be another who recognized the courage and love it represented. By the following spring, their small ranch was taking shape. They raised horses rather than cattle, with Kiona proving to have a remarkable gift for training the animals. Word spread about the quality of their stock, bringing buyers despite initial reluctance to do business with a mixed couple. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their newly completed cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Kiona took Yates' hand and placed it on her stomach. "We will have a child when the winter snows melt," she said softly. Joy and wonder swept through Yates like a cleansing flood. He gathered her into his arms, overcome with emotion. "Are you happy, husband?" Kiona asked, her dark eyes searching his. "Happier than I ever believed possible," he answered truthfully. "For so many years I thought the frontier was no place for love. That attachment only made you vulnerable. That to survive, a man had to stand alone. And now..." Yates looked out over the land they had made their own, then back at the extraordinary woman who had changed everything. "Now I know that true strength comes from connection, not isolation, that even in the harshest wilderness, the human heart seeks its match." He placed his hand over hers where it rested on their growing child. "And that love doesn't just help us survive the frontier, it's the reason for surviving at all." As twilight deepened into night, they remained together on the porch, two souls who had found in each other not just passion or companionship, but a home neither had believed possible in the wild expanses of the American West. From strangers to soulmates, their journey had only just begun.